In a recent gameplay video, I encountered a mechanic that deserves its own dedicated video. Compared to some of the others we've seen so far, the gameplay of this mechanic is actually fairly simple. However, it gives you some of the most complex and important rewards in the whole game. The mechanic is called Delirium. It is triggered by touching an object called a Delirium mirror. This will cause the world around you to turn into a temporary nightmare mode in more than one sense of the word. Not only do you get extra mobs spawning during Delirium, but the mobs that were already in the zone will also get buffed. This buff gets stronger as you travel further from where you touch the mirror. When you're very far away from the mirror, monsters will take much less damage from your attacks, and they'll deal much more damage to you. Monsters can also gain special abilities while Delirium is active, and some of these are quite devastating. If you engage a boss with Delirium on, even the boss gets buffed. During all this, there's a tally that is running in the lower left of the screen. This is keeping track of how many mobs you kill, and as you meet certain thresholds, you earn more batches of rewards. The type of rewards that you get is different from encounter to encounter. Under normal circumstances, these rewards are randomized. Sometimes it's gear, sometimes it's currency drops, and you can even get league-specific stuff, like Abyss Jewels and Blight Oils. Normally, the Delirium will fade after some time, though you can extend it by quite a ways if you make a lot of kills very fast. At the end of the encounter, all the batches of loot that you've earned will drop nearby. There are things that you can do to make it so that Delirium lasts indefinitely in a map. There is an Atlas passive that you can get later on that makes all Delirium encounters permanent, though you still have to be lucky enough to have the mirror appear on the map. Note that in the permanent versions, instead of dropping all at once at the end, rewards will drop as you earn them. If you don't have that passive active, you can occasionally find Delirium orbs that can be applied to maps. Depending on the type of orb it is, the map is guaranteed to have a permanent Delirium encounter that gives a specific type of reward. All Delirium encounters can also potentially drop another very useful type of reward: Cluster Jewels. Cluster Jewels are jewels that you can socket into large jewel sockets on your passive tree. There are only 6 large sockets available on the entire tree, and you have to travel quite far to get to them. But it's worth it, because once you slot a large cluster jewel into one of these, you actually unlock a whole new group of passive skills. You know, because the passive tree wasn't already complicated enough. Note that you do still need to spend passive points in order to use these nodes. Some builds go to great lengths to get at least 2 large clusters, and it can be challenging to make a build well-rounded enough to support all that extra stuff. But if you can make it work, you can greatly boost your build with the help of cluster jewels. There are 3 different categories of cluster jewels: large, medium, and small. The large ones offer anywhere from 8 to 12 passives, 3 of which can be notables. 2 of them are jewel sockets. These sockets are large enough to fit any jewel that is medium size or smaller. The medium cluster jewels offer 4 to 6 passives, up to 2 notables, and 1 small jewel socket. The small jewel socket can fit any type of jewel that isn't a medium or large. Small cluster jewels offer 2 to 3 passives and can have up to 1 notable. They cannot have jewel sockets. The notables that you can get from cluster jewels are specific to them. You can't find them anywhere on the passive tree normally, so you can find new passives that you've never seen before. Each size category has a specific set of passives that they can spawn with. Every large cluster jewel offers some kind of increased damage. The difference between them is how you're doing the damage. There's a large jewel for attack damage, there's one for spell damage, there's one for physical damage, one for minion damage. Pretty much every style archetype can be found among the large jewels. Then there are medium jewels, most of which also give you more damage, but the source of the damage is more specific. Area damage, brand damage, trap and mine damage. Someone who's playing an ice trap build, for example, would want to have a large jewel that increases cold damage, and then a medium jewel that increases trap and mine damage. Medium jewels also have a couple of utility passives, but most people will be aiming for the ones that give more damage. The small jewels are all about defenses. They only give you a few nodes, and I haven't really seen many people using them on PoE Ninja. But I like to use them to give myself a few more of the precious defense nodes that are already in short supply on the passive tree, like block chance or chaos resistance. Now, the fact that you could just add an entire cluster of passives to your tree is already cool enough. But you know what's even cooler? You can actually craft on these things. Cluster jewels have rarity levels and item levels, just like regular gear does, and the affixes actually add to what you're already getting with the passives. It can get expensive as you spend crafting materials trying to get the roll you want, but getting an ideal roll on a cluster jewel's affixes can make a huge difference in your DPS, and it can be used to patch up holes in the rest of your build. You struggling enough to maintain enough dexterity to equip your high-level green gems? You have the option to roll the cluster jewel until each small passive also gives you dexterity. You want to push up that chaos resistance a little higher? That's also a thing you can do. Getting the perfect cluster jewels for your build will probably take a while, but even just getting ones that are good enough can be a huge leap forward. Note that the number of passives on a cluster jewel is fixed, and so is the implicit bonus. If you're lucky enough to find the bonus you want and it's the maximum size that it can be, that's a big deal. I do need to add, though, that bigger isn't always better. Sometimes a build will just want to get the notables in as few jumps as possible. For this, you actually want smaller versions of the jewels. This chart shows which jewels have the optimal pathing for that. Considering that these things are also limited by item level, you might be searching for a while to find the perfect base to use. A cluster jewel has to be at least item level 84 to roll the best possible stats. But it could be a while before you get that, so don't be afraid to settle for one that isn't quite as amazing. Even a mediocre jewel can offer serious benefits as long as it matches your playstyle. While you shouldn't delay socketing a cluster jewel for too long, you do have to be ready to commit to it for a little while. If you want to change jewels or try to re-roll the one that you're currently using, you need to have enough orbs of regret to refund the passive points that you've allocated in the jewel. You cannot re-roll a jewel that you currently have equipped. Doing the Delirium encounters isn't the only way to get cluster jewels. If your character isn't quite beefy enough to handle those encounters, you may have more luck getting jewels out of heists. Heists are another topic that I'll probably be making a video on, so I won't go into a lot of detail here, but I will tell you two things. Number one, you can only get the cluster jewels from heists that require a demolition expert. Number two, you can easily ensure that you won't lose stolen items during a heist. As long as the alert bar isn't full yet, you can go back to the entrance and step outside the heist to turn all of your contraband into permanent items that you won't drop on death. This makes cluster jewels much more accessible, even to poorly optimized characters who might have trouble surviving a full heist. When I realized I needed to chase down some cluster jewels, I got my first couple of them from heists. Once I got those and I got a little stronger, I invested heavily in Delirium nodes in the Atlas passives, and I made it so that all of my Delirium encounters were permanent. At that point, I was able to start farming higher level jewels. I've since pulled those passives in favor of other things, but for a while there, I had jewels dropping like candy. Speaking of which, if you get a ton of cluster jewels that you don't need, you can vendor 5 of them at once to get a brand new one. The 5 must all be of the same rarity and category. Note that the item level does matter in this conversion, so be aware that you can potentially end up with a very low level jewel if you're including old crappy ones in the list. Craft of Exile is a very helpful resource for exploring what's possible with cluster jewels. I put a link to it in the description. You can use the emulator there to quickly get an idea of what kinds of modifiers you can look forward to on cluster jewels. There's actually a whole set of zones made just for Delirium, where you fight waves of mobs. These places have a guaranteed chance of fighting Delirium-specific bosses, assuming you last long enough. However, I can't show you how those play out, because despite going through quite a few Delirium encounters, I haven't even gotten a third of the shards that it takes to open one of those places up. Solo self-found be like that sometimes. Even though I can't show you that, I hope that this video has helped you learn the basics of the mechanic. If you want to read up on simulacrums, I'll put a link in the description. Fortunately, you don't necessarily need a simulacrum to fight the bosses and potentially get their unique drops. The bosses do have a chance of appearing in regular Delirium encounters, but it is rare. If you found this video helpful, please leave a like and maybe consider buying me a coffee. If I got anything wrong or didn't explain something well enough, let me know in the comments and I'll try to tie up loose ends. Thanks for watching!